Next level. Thank you for attending today, the work session of the Aspen City Council on December 15th. We are coming close to the new year and almost done with our meetings. So today we're going to have a work session and a presentation by the organization Safe Passages to be able to look at Highway 82 safe passage crossings. Really appreciate your work and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Really appreciate it. Just quickly introduce myself. My name is Tucker Vesperton. I'm with Roaring Fork Safe Passages. We also have Julia Kinch and Cecily DeAngelo online. Ladies, can you see us, hear us? I think they're on there.
Yes, can you guys hear us?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And Julia, do you have the screen share? Is that up already? I'm not able to see it.
Are you?
Sorry, I was managing screens, but I will bring up a presentation if you want to go ahead and get started. I'll do that now.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself and the founding of this nonprofit. And I really want to thank you guys for the opportunity to present on this issue to your work session this evening, and apologize for not being there in person. I actually have to jump straight into my council meeting up here in Snowmass after we're done. I may even have to leave a few minutes early, but my name is Cecily DeAngelo, and I founded this nonprofit in 2022, and it was a moment in time where, growing up in this valley, I sort of accepted both the fear I sensed as a driver and the tragedy of seeing wildlife killed on the highway as something that was inevitable. And that year I read a New York Times article that really highlighted how far the science of wildlife crossings, overpasses and underpasses that reconnect wildlife corridors and move animals over and under highways, how far the advances in that science had come, and that in locations where it was being implemented, and you can think of Banff or here in Colorado, we have Highway 9, which is between Kremling and Silverthorne, that had reduced wildlife vehicle collisions by up to 90+%. And when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a solvable problem. It's one that is something I've dealt with my entire life, and I would really like to work on this issue. I was really lucky and was able to piggyback this nonprofit on the work of Tom Cardamone and the Watershed Biodiversity Initiative. And we were able to use the work that Tom did and the Biodiversity Initiative to develop the mitigation, both the prioritization plans that we did and the mitigation recommendations that we came up with. And one thing that became really apparent to me as I became interested in this work and started the nonprofit with the help of a lot of wonderful locals, including Tom, was that the reason why organizations like Roaring Fork Safe Passages are so important is that oftentimes it takes a grassroots movement, meaning local philanthropic dollars, citizen initiatives, and local governments coming together to really lay the groundwork for this type of work. And that's what's able to attract the larger dollars potentially coming from state or federal funding. And Tucker will talk a little bit about that at the end as well. And so back to the founding of this organization, we were really lucky to be put in touch early on with Julia Kinch, who is one of the foremost experts on wildlife road ecology, and she has worked all over the state of Colorado and all over the United States on this issue. And she came on board quite early with us, and in 2023, we did our prioritization plan, both on highways 82 and 133. And I'm going to turn it over to Julia to jump in and present to you.
Thank you, Cecily, and thank you, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you this evening and give you a little bit of update on the work that we've been doing. So as Cecily mentioned, I'm kind of here to quantify a little bit of the scope of the problem of what we're dealing with and how we're looking at addressing that. Notably, in the Roaring Fork Valley, the data show us that wildlife vehicle collisions have been a leading cause of reported crashes to law enforcement and actually account for 30% of all of crashes in this valley on Highway 82 and 133. And notably, that's actually really underreporting because there are 2 to 4 times as many crashes that happen than are ever recorded. And so the scope of the problem is pretty extensive, and I'm sure many of you have seen animals near roads, on roads, or even, been involved in some sort of conflict or near miss with an animal. And there's consequences for drivers, there's consequences for wildlife mortality and wildlife connectivity. There's also economic consequences associated with this, and the cost of collisions in this valley is $5.2 million per year. And I would say that's actually a very conservative estimate. But it's a justifiable number that we can put out there. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're dealing with here. And as Cecily mentioned, in 2023, Roaring Fork Safe Passages completed this watershed-wide analysis looking at these issues of wildlife corridors and wildlife vehicle conflict, again, building on the work that the Watershed Biodiversity Institute had conducted. And through that process, identified these 6 priority areas. And 3 of them are areas where we identified that wildlife crossings might be feasible based on the terrain and other favorable conditions. And you see those 3 here in orange. And what we're going to focus on here is this airport to Woody Creek segment on Highway 82. That is the first priority area of those 6 where we decided to focus our efforts. And the reasons for that were multifold. Certainly, this is an area where we see a lot of wildlife vehicle collisions and a really high rate of collisions with elk, which I'll show you a slide on that here in a minute, as well as other wildlife. It's also an area where there's a lot of existing public lands or protected lands. And so there's the greater landscape, there's a lot of these land protections and areas that wildlife can use as corridors or seasonal habitat that are really important for sustaining healthy wildlife populations. And then finally, we have a lot of really great existing partnerships in this landscape, and those partnerships are really integral to the success of these types of projects. So our goals for this mitigation study and assessment are to reduce wildlife vehicle conflict and enhance driver safety, to preserve that long-term permeability so that animals can move back and forth safely across the highway to access the resources and habitat that they need, and to support at a landscape scale those broader wildlife movements and connectivity. So here's a map of the wildlife vehicle conflict in this segment. You can see the Aspen Airport down here in the bottom of the map and extending up here towards Cozy Point. This is Brush Creek here. And the size of the circles kind of represent the relative kind of number of collisions. So the bigger the circle, the more collisions there are. And I said that, in the Roaring Fork Valley as a whole, that wildlife vehicle crashes account for 30% of all crashes. Well, in this particular segment, that jumps up to 55%. So this is a really concentrated area here where we're seeing a lot of this conflict. And 34% of those collisions are with elk. And I didn't give you any basis of comparison for that, but that's a really high rate. Overall, across the state and in other areas, even in this valley, most of our conflict is with deer. So the fact that over 1/3 of these collisions are with elk is a big deal. It's also really concerning because an elk is a really big animal and it's a big safety hazard to hit an elk. So I'm not going to talk about the actual planning process here. That was a really in-depth, over a year-long process that we went through, but that report is available on Roaring Fork Safe Passage's website. And what really came out of this was a phased wildlife mitigation strategy that allows us some flexible implementation as well. And so the initial focus is really on these lower cost, near-term, kind of incremental improvements that support these subsequent phases, which include wildlife crossings infrastructure. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of that here. These near-term improvements, these are actions that we can implement on a shorter timeline and achieve some success in terms of reducing wildlife vehicle conflict, and do this, kind of at a lower cost. It doesn't require quite as much effort, and really support those subsequent efforts, which are going to be higher cost and take a lot more planning to implement. So what we're looking at specifically is we have wildlife fencing in this segment along the highway between Shale Bluffs and the airport. But the problem is there's a lot of issues with that fencing, and animals are getting trapped in there. So there's opportunities to improve that existing infrastructure. And we can do this at a pretty reasonable cost of about $500,000 to $725,000. Then phase one recommendations, this is kind of, the big thing of looking at wildlife crossings infrastructure. And what we're recommending here are 2 wildlife crossing structures. So a bridge underpass at Sky Mountain, just north of the airport here. And you can see how that connects to a lot of these existing protected lands here. And then an overpass at Brush Creek. And then fencing that would connect all the way through this segment up to Smith Hill Road. So I have a couple other slides here to give you a little bit of a visualization of what this could actually look like. So there's actually a box culvert that is at this location right now. However, it's undersized. It's too small for elk to use. It's a long, dark tunnel, and elk won't use it. CPW's had cameras out there, and we know that deer and bear and other wildlife use it, but elk don't. So it doesn't address the connectivity issue for elk. And so what we're proposing is to replace this with a larger structure that is suitable for elk passage. And here's another view of what that would look like. And then the second structure is at Brush Creek, just at the north end of Shale Bluffs. And this is a location where we recommend an overpass structure as really being the most feasible and optimized structure at this particular location to address the movement needs of the array of wildlife in this area. There's another picture, kind of view of that, and a little sunset view. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tucker to talk a little bit further about the public input survey.
Julia, Tucker, do you mind if I just add one additional thing to that, which is both the prioritization plan and the mitigation plan were supported by Aspen Parks and Open Space. And I just really want to thank you guys for the support, not only financially, but also we have had some really great partners at Aspen Parks and Open Space who have worked with us throughout the process. Yeah.
Thank you, Cecily.
Cool. Yep. Thank you, ladies. So moving on, we did a public input survey July through September of this past year. We had 732 local respondents, and it was really cool because, as you can see here, people really strongly support this. We had 96% support wildlife crossings, and within that, 87% of those strongly supported. We also had people say that 94% consider collision reduction extremely or very important. This number is kind of terrifying. 77% have personal experience or close calls with wildlife vehicle incidents, and then 85% believe this project would improve their quality of life. But beyond what the survey says, so I just started with Rowing for Safe Passages in October, but I had been volunteering with Cecily since the inception. In 2022, I worked at SkiCo for a really long time. And I've talked to a lot of people in the community about this, and people think it's really cool. There's a lot of positive sentiment. I also love this because it has a lot of bipartisan support. And I love that because, in a world where things are kind of getting very polarized, this is something that brings us together and, that we can all get behind. And also it's solvable, climate change, all of these big issues, like they're massive. But this has proven to be effective by over 90%. And honestly, that's why I'm sitting here as well, because we can do this and we can do this together. Another really cool statistic that stands out to me on here is the 85% believe this project would improve their quality of life. And I just really love that because, we all live here. I mean, I live here. Most people live here because of nature and the outdoors and this beautiful, this gorgeous, beautiful place that we all live in. And our well-being as humans is not disconnected from, you guys all know this, from the natural world. Like we're all deeply interconnected, we're all one, we're all very deeply intertwined. And you know, when the natural world thrives, we thrive, and when we thrive, the natural world thrives. And so I just really love that. And yes, the next slide has so in the survey we had a comment box where people could just type their own comments. And we had some deputies, you know, they see this as like a huge problem. They wrote it in here. You can see a couple of those comments. You know, people are saying, you know, this should be a big priority. It's, you know, it's scary, most serious car accidents I've been in with wildlife. So definitely some cool comments there. And the last thing that we're going to end on is, I'm sure many of you have heard, but just this last November, a federal bill was introduced, and it is called the Wildlife Road Crossings Program Reauthorization Act of 2025. And this was introduced by Representative Zinke, who's a Republican in Montana, and Representative Bayer, I think I'm saying their names right, of Virginia. He's a Democrat. So bipartisan support there, which is rad. And this bill would move the federal wildlife crossings program so it was a pilot program, and those funds have since all been allocated. And this would move it into more of a permanent fixture at the federal level, and it would be $200 million annually. So this is huge and exciting, and this could fund like huge, big, critical projects across the nation coming down the pipeline. But with the asterisks so the federal dollars from this new bill will only flow to states where there is matching percentages from state and local entities. So essentially, I'm gonna end on the only way we're gonna.
One second, what was the name of the bill one more time?
Yes, it's the Wildlife Road Crossings Program Reauthorization Act of 2025.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, no, it's kind of a mouthful. I say the Federal Wildlife Crossings Bill. And I just want to end that things like this, you guys all know this, they get done when we do it all together. So we're here to collaborate, and we want to do this all together. So
Thank you so much for the presentation. Council members, do we have questions or comments?
I was very excited to have you guys come and present, and I think one of the things that was missing right now is just what the ask might be at some point for the city council.
That's a great question. Cecily, Julia, do you guys
Sorry.
know the answer to that?
Yeah, so I think there's two pieces to that. The first two locations are not on city land. And so we have felt that, in talking to our really wonderful partners at Aspen Parks and Open Space, I think it's felt like there was sort of a moment to take a pause in the financial support for Roaring Fork Safe Passages. And I think, that being said, I could see a scenario where Aspen supports in the future again. This certainly, while it is not on open space that is owned by Aspen, it does affect, I think of this sometimes as like a steward even of our visitors, and every visitor that comes to Aspen, every resident that has to drive to and from somewhere, down valley, every worker that comes to Aspen is really put in the line of danger when they are driving through an area where an elk, now increasingly moose, might be in the middle of the road. I even think of this as like an equity issue where, oftentimes those who are the most affected might be someone who has a really early morning shift or is having to commute home late at night. So I think at this point, we don't have an ask. We would love Aspen to join back in the future if it feels like something that you guys are able to do and able to justify, given that it's not the first two priority locations currently are not on Aspen property. I should caveat all this that we're hoping to jump into feasibility and our feasibility studies may lead us to moving the locations. So it's not that these locations are set in stone, but they are our initial recommendations. One final piece that I would say, I would love to see all local entities, meaning Snowmass, Pickens County, and Aspen come together to start the funding for the near-term improvements. I think if we get a significant start on that, we will be eligible for some really large grants that come through organizations such as NIFWIF, which NIFWIF comes from, do I have that right, Julia? Sorry, Julia's gonna, yeah, NIFWIF, that comes, it's like a GOCO, so it's lottery money. But I think if we get a local start on those funds, then we will be eligible to start applying for GOCO, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and that sits adjacent to, and I am now not remembering whose land that is, but it does sit adjacent to the ABC. And it's an area where animals are funneled straight onto the road. There's no fencing whatsoever. And then the only way to get off the road on the other side is through a very small chute that then takes them around the end of the runway. And it's often why we see such like horrible tragedy at that place. It is, if we are to move forward on that project, it will be limiting a certain amount of connectivity, but I think it's worth limiting that connectivity in the short term if we are aiming to build the connectivity at the underpass, because it's just carnage. It's not a good place for animals to be getting onto the road. So no ask today, but I would, love the participation of Aspen in the future.
Thank you very much. Additional comments or questions, Christine?
Just a comment and a question. I assume you've thought about this, but the airport passage timing with the airport construction, if that moves forward, is that part of the plans? Yeah,
so it's unlikely because it would be lovely to share a contractor and be doing the construction at the same time, especially given what we're going to have going on in the valley at the time. That being said, we will have to go through a full NEPA process. I know you guys know about that. And I don't think that it's realistic, especially given that we will also need a thumbs up from the FAA. Half of that land is on airport property. And we have been very kindly asked not to bring this up with the FAA until everything with the airport is well in motion. So I think by that time, we will not be able to complete the NEPA process. I even was very optimistic and thinking maybe we could tag at the end of the airport. And it's not to say that that door is closed. I spoke to CDOT about it, but I think we would have to aggressively raise the money and agree on this process for the underpass in order for it to happen even at the end of the runway construction. That being said, it will overlap with other airport improvements. It just probably will not be done all at the same time.
Got it. That's helpful. Thanks. And then out of curiosity, is there any research or information yet on how technology like AI, smart cars is reducing collisions already? Is that out there?
I can speak to that a little bit. So with a 4-lane highway, I think that potentially self-driving cars are going to help with reducing collisions. That being said, in any scenario where you're trying to get 4 cars to all stop at once, it's virtually impossible. So with human drivers, it really does not work on that type of highway. It's much better suited and Julia probably has some words about this, it's better suited for a 2-lane highway. But the one thing that will never be created, even if collision avoidance is improved, is that we can't reconnect these pieces of wildlife habitat that we're doing such a concerted effort in this valley to keep and maintain. It's really about it's like a stent. It opens up, it breathes life into everything around it. So that will really, regardless of technology, a certain amount of connectivity that is human-free is really, really important for the vibrance of our community. And it adds something in addition to just wildlife collision avoidance.
Got it. That's great. Thank you.
John, did you have any comments?
I just wanted to say I fully support wildlife crossings. Saw some amazing crossings up in Wyoming when I was up in Jackson Hole for a conference last year, and they can be done very aesthetically, and I support this going forward. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. How can you not say it's good work? There's really a lot of value, and we all have known or seen very close collision situations. And, at the same time, we all know about CDOT's funding shortfalls for the state highway, and it really is an issue created by the state highway in many ways, but CDOT's short tens of billions, and we're going to be competing for those sort of limited dollars just for our entrance, which also would provide a new safe crossing at the entrance to town with our Merle property, as opposed to other proposals that literally add more lanes without a crossing. But so I have to say I am concerned about the dollars, where the dollars really come from. And I do not see at this point in time our general fund having significant money to contribute. If there was a joint effort, I think we'd all take a look hard and to see something to help get this off the ground. I had a similar question, if not a comment, to Christine's, that it really would seem like the airport's work and the airport itself should be responsible for some fencing improvements to their property. And the fencing that they currently have, which really shunts cars onto Highway 82, I think that this becomes an obligation of the airport itself for how they're, where are they redirecting the wildlife. But it seems like the airport and the fencing should have some funding participation, even if it's not part of their current master plan, as well as the FAA funding. They spend an awful lot of money to try to keep birds away from their runways. It seems that they should be worried about bears and elk getting on their property as well.
And, Rachel, just to add to that, they
Yeah.
do remove the carcasses
Yeah.
often just for that reason. So the operations team at the airport is often out there making sure that anything that's, anywhere near the runway is removed as quick as possible because it is a hazard.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I realize that, and I really can only compliment you on taking on such a difficult and daunting and yet extremely important work. And, as you noted in your presentation, a great many of these in Colorado were funded with private donations for the most part because Colorado doesn't have any money in its transportation fund at a significant level. Unfortunately, this last year, they cut out the multimodal options program, and we're depending on that for so many reasons. And I know both ours and Pickens County's open space and trails have a significant number of either projects in front of them or potential projects that they'd love to find the funding for as well, just as like people crossing from Brush Creek Intercept over to the Rio Grande Trail, get more cars off the road. But what I know it's a large thing to ask, but this is a countywide issue. And as you say, it's a countywide value. And I think it'd be worth looking at whether there should be a potential of a very small countywide vote on a property tax for wildlife crossings. And it would be, as you've mentioned, to the benefit of everyone who uses the road for their personal safety and to the benefit of our own values. And so I think, organizing and pursuing a campaign of private donations makes a lot of sense. but you're always in competition with Aspen Historical Society's planning on going for a new drive. There's other potential large fundraising drives in the community. And again, I'm not discouraging that. I'm just saying there becomes a point at which when you want something really taken care of, you put a dedicated funding source towards it. And I would be happy to talk with people about advancing some sort of safe passages specifically dedicated as a funding source for this project in Picken County. But we're talking 133, we're talking Highway 82, we're talking any number of side roads that also have issues. So I think it'd be worth taking a look at. It's a big question, there's other needs, but at some level, this could be a very small ask that could constantly go forward towards this. That's what I would recommend pursuing.
Cool. That's great, Rachel. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Those were really great thoughts.
Yeah, and that's about all that I really have right now. The one question I'll have is, can someone explain the difference between a one-way gate versus an escape ramp? Are escape ramps the ones that have the railing and come down, but what's a one-way? They can get in, but they can't get out? They can get out, but they can't get in?
Julia, I was going to say, Julia, do you want to take that one?
I'll tackle this. So the one-way gates, they're literally, and you have them on that existing fencing. And back when we first built wildlife fencing in the 70s and early 2000s, in that time period, that was the method that was used to allow animals to escape out of a fence right away. So what it is it's literally, they're kind of curved tines, and they only swing in one direction. So an animal that is inside the highway right away that got through some gap or something can only, they can go that direction, but they can't come from the habitat side back into the highway right away. And what we've learned over time, at the time it was like, hey, this is the best idea we've got, let's build them and see what works.
Sure.
And what we learned is that they're kind of maintenance nightmares. The tines get, mangled, they get stuck open, and then they become a hole in the fence. And so they're not really great. And so over time, what we and other Western states have really started building are those escape ramps or jump outs. And so they're kind of gentle ramps that animals can climb up and then have a way through the fencing to jump off. So that you're trying to find a nice height where they'll jump off and outside of the highway right away, but not so low that they can jump back in. So, yeah, exactly. And we're doing a pretty good job of that. I would say none of it's not 100% foolproof, but they work pretty darn well. And we've learned, how to design them better over time.
Great.
And Mayor, do you mind if I just follow up on one
Sure.
of the comments that you
Please.
made about CDOT? I'm not going to count this as a win, but Roaring Fork Safe Passages is doing a lot of advocacy work, both at the state level, and we're starting to jump in to advocate for this federal bill. And we actually just worked with Chris Davenport to make a promotional advocacy video that's going to go to the state legislators. And we're really hoping that the state of Colorado opens up, I think it's the road safety, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the bill. I'll email it to you guys. But that would be essentially a better permanent funding source for wildlife crossings at the state level. And ideally, we also get this money at the federal level. While it is not an easy thing to fund, it is one of the things that bipartisan, so many different people from different parts of life agree on. And it is oddly, and I'm going to just stay a little bit optimistic, that it's one of the things that is receiving a bit more funding than others for transportation right now.
Yeah, that's all very encouraging, and I appreciate the work. I'm not trying to say take it to a different direction, but I do think that federal funding sources kind of come and go, unfortunately, and there's a lot of bipartisan support right now for extending the Obamacare healthcare subsidies, but nothing's happening, unfortunately, because you need bipartisan majorities as opposed to just and that's a challenge. So all I'm doing is trying to think, how do you have something that really becomes real? Because no matter what they allocate nationwide, that is then spread across 600 million people's roadways across the United States. And unfortunately, allocation of funds of late have gone out on political bases as opposed to who has a blue state governor or a red state governor. So I wouldn't want to hold my breath for the next 3 years on what that federal administration could do, even if they have money. So I was just trying to suggest that you can really show community support and to find out where your community support is and at what level, and then you have your matching dollars set aside for any of these programs to pull down state, federal, or even philanthropic dollars. So that's all I was trying to say, is that, I like to think big picture and how do you really get this done?
Cool. I really appreciate that, and I agree. I really thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, no, thank you, and thank you for getting this organization started and bringing the public awareness that it's not just a condition of life and something can be done here, and I agree with that.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
all. We
Now, did Tercia want to talk? It just says allowed to talk. Were you trying to make a comment, Tercia, on this item? No. Okay, thank you. Just trying to double check my video screen.
Thank you all. We
Thank you
really
all
appreciate it.
for your presentation. Greatly appreciate it.
Those parks.
Okay, where am I?
Always thought those ramps were both ways.
All right. We are now going to go into the second section of our work session, which is a development review update on land use and permit process improvements and requests for council direction. So thank you all for being here. I know you've been working on this project for a good period of time, and it's nice to have a check-in and see what's next. So Ben, you can take it away.
Thank you. Just working on getting PowerPoint up here.
No problem.
Gonna make us dizzy. Good evening, Mayor and Council. For the record, Ben Anderson, Community Development Director. Sitting here with three really important members of our community development team. Bonnie, our Chief Building Official, Dan, our Planning Director, and Sydney, who leads our Development Services team, are here this evening. This memo and presentation this evening is definitely a kind of a group effort and represents work that we've been doing across the department over the last, 2 years or so. The conversation tonight is a bit of an update of some previous conversations that community development has had with city council, again, over the last couple of years ago. The previous city manager had some very direct conversations with community development back in 2023. I think in response to, both council and community discussions that we're having about development review and timelines associated with development review. And as a consequence of that, we've taken some concerted efforts in response to that, and want to just talk to you a little bit about where that is, some new things that we're working on, and to give a little bit of data in support of both the things that we've been working on and things that we intend to work on. So I'm going to do a few of the slides tonight. Sydney's going to take some slides, Dan's going to take some slides, and Bonnie will be jumping in as we go through this presentation. But as we're going through this, it was a fairly significant memo. I think it was 14 pages. We've got a number of slides this evening. There's data points to look at. We're happy, while we're going through this discussion, please stop us with any questions or points of clarification that you might have, and we'll be happy to turn this into a more informal discussion should council desire. The agenda tonight, very quickly, we'd like to talk a little bit about the outcomes that we're working within, the background on this topic. We want to talk just from a kind of an education for the community perspective, kind of what development review means, the basics. We're then going to move in a little bit different order than the memo, talk about some of the building permit data that we have to talk with you about. We've got slides specifically talking about some of the permit improvements that we've been engaged in over the last couple of years, talking about coming planning improvements as the work that we've been doing with baseline engineering. And then we do have a couple questions that were in your memo that we would like some council direction on as we go through the discussion. So, I think this topic has very much been, I think, both a priority for council and a priority for city leadership, and certainly a priority for community development and our fellow review agencies over the last couple of years. But this current council has put together this working principle of improvement of core service delivery through process improvement with the customer in mind. And I think this work fits directly within, I think, the intentions of that work. Introducing these questions to you now, just so you can be thinking about them as we go through the presentation. We'll come back to them at the end of the presentation. Ultimately, staff has taken a path on this. We think that it's incremental but important, both on the permit side and on land use side. And we want to see if council's supportive of that kind of incremental and important improvements, because there are other paths that we could take, but they're different paths. And we want to make sure that, as staff continues to work on these things, that we're responding to council's intentions on that. And then secondly, we had these conversations with our last city manager, and certainly these conversations have started with Pete, to try to identify the data points that would be most useful to council and the community around development services, and kind of what frequency would you like that data to be presented to you. Certainly we have information-only memos that we can come to you with. We have regular updates from the city manager that we could include in that presentation. But just thinking about what kind of data would be useful to you as you're thinking about this topic, and how often would you like to see it. This is a lot of text, mostly for my purposes rather than yours. Because I think that as we start this conversation this evening, very quickly, development review is obviously a topic that is at the center of a lot of economic activity in this town, is very important to a lot of members of our community in terms of their livelihood. We have obviously a very significant construction industry. We have a design community. We have property managers. We have real estate, the real estate industry, who all have a very clear economic vested interest in this topic. We also have a lot of very strong feelings from the community about the pace and scale of development, and we've had a lot of discussions over the years with City Council about those concerns as well. And so ComDev staff is often caught in the middle of that discussion, and that I think it's inherently a tension that's there. And also this process is complex. It's regulation-based. And I think the thing that we sometimes forget about this is that it's very human-intensive, both for staff, but also for our applicants. There are humans on both sides of that equation, and that translates into things that are sometimes not linear. I think we want this process to be very linear and very predictable. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's just not. I will also say that everybody sitting at this table and everybody in our department is fully committed to making this process better. We think about it every day. And we also believe that we're making regular, targeted, incremental improvements on this topic and this concern. I will also say that as we look at solutions to this, because of the complexity, because of the number of people that are involved, even small changes to the process can be difficult and can also take time. Some of these things are limited by our technology that we have available to us. Some of these changes require code amendments. And certainly coordination across review agencies. And lastly, I just want to say, I think we have made a lot of very significant improvements. You're going to see some evidence of that in some of the data that we presented in the memo tonight, and we will in just a few minutes in the slides. But we also very much know that there are permits that are in our system that are taking way too much time. Those are for, in some cases, general types of permits, and some of the permits that we look at. But we also have a fairly high frequency of one-off falling through the cracks scenarios where individual permits take too much time, and we acknowledge that, and we're trying to identify those things and do something about it. So please know, we know that there are things that we need to do better on, but I also hope it comes across that we are committed to making those improvements and share council and the community's interests in trying to make this a better situation for everybody involved. I won't go through this slide very much. It's mostly just a visual representation that when we talk about development review, I think ComDev is often the face of this, but it involves several city departments who have sections of the municipal code that they're tasked with regulating. All of us are playing a part in development review. All of us have complex regulations that we're navigating, and those regulations are reflective of important community values. We also have a couple of non-City of Aspen review agencies that are very much involved in many reviews for permits from the Aspen Fire District and Aspen Sanitation District, who participate through our Salesforce platform, who participate in development review in the same way that our city agencies do. Within community development, and this was really the kind of the structure of the memo, we're looking across development review broadly across the city. That's Sydney's team is tasked with doing that. But within community development, when we say development review, we're talking about two functions. We're talking about land use and the sort of planning function, and then we're talking about permit review that a different portion of our staff participates in. They're related, they're dependent on each other often, and they're also very different, and they can operate on very different timelines with very different requirements. So with that, I'm happy to talk about respond to any questions in that initial part of the presentation, but also very much willing to move on if you'd like to at this time.
Any early questions about why we're seeing this tonight? No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to turn things over to Sydney on the next several slides. We're going to go through permitting data that has come out of our Salesforce system. And then we're going to be talking about some of the specific improvements that data has given direction to in terms of permit improvements over the last couple of years. I want to give particular props to Sydney and her small but mighty team, both in ComDev and outside of ComDev. They were tasked with some really big things when this team was set up, to look at our permit process, to coordinate across referral agencies, to try to identify the places where permits were getting hung up, or common issues, common questions, common complaints. They were tasked with starting to look at those things, on top of trying to pull data out of Salesforce in a way that could kind of inform some of these choices a little bit more thoughtfully, and a little bit to give us some ability to target those changes a little bit more carefully. So with that, I want to turn things over to Sydney.
Great. Hello. Sydney Fallon, Development Services. I have a team of 3 that formed maybe a year and a half ago. And like Ben said, interdepartmental collaboration is kind of the name of the game. We keep permits moving through the system while also trying to reform it at the same time. And you'll see some of that data that informs our action plan. So this is pretty much just volumes, permits in, permits issued, some of the valuation. I'd like to call out the number of change orders we deal with on a regular basis. And then just the asterisks, the little small text kind of gives away some of the complexity we're dealing with when we might be asked by council, oh, we want building permit data. And it's like, okay, well, what do you mean by building permit? Does that include roofs? Does that include your interiors? Does that include your repairs? do you want residential versus commercial? Do you want, so there's all these different ways to break it down. And we're really actively engaged with these numbers and trying to make sure that whatever we're giving to you, spreading internally, and certainly before we start just regularly presenting this to the public, we want to make sure everyone's really clear on what we're giving.
And what does the category on your slide, change, refer to?
Change orders. So for any minor or major permit, that would be a pretty good metric, that's almost quarter?
Yeah,
That means the permit has been issued, and then the applicants have come back after the fact and changed their minds about something that requires review. Sometimes there's additional information. If it's just a page or two, it's something super light, then that can be handled a little bit more administratively, but with these numbers, it gets a little bit overwhelming, especially if multiple review agencies need to look at the change. So these are also kind of clunking up our system and causing reviewers to circle back. It's a new application. They got to get reoriented. It's an administrative sort of organizational task to keep track of it.
okay, thank you for that. And I'm just kind of feeling like when you take this public, make sure you put change orders under that title, so they have some sort of sense of what it is. And that would be a topic to talk about more in the future, because there's sometimes a perception that people come in with something to get a certain approval and get going, and they really had that change order in mind from day one, and now they're stopping the project and putting our staff on the spot for holding them up while they have actually changed significantly from what they submitted.
That's a sentiment that I'm hearing less of these days. When I first started, there was definitely a sense of, especially around code changes, you better get your permit in now, knowing full well that they were planning on building something else. So that's huge.
Okay, well, I think I'd love at a different meeting to talk about what should be required, I'm not going to say penalized, of a change order, and how do they bump into the process of other projects that have been waiting in line patiently? Things like that. Thank you.
They are a topic that I do think cause consternation for both applicants and staff. They're often submitted while a project is in construction. And, there's timeliness to that. And so I do think that it's a topic that we feel a lot of pressure on once they're submitted. And I think for the applicants do as well, often. So anything else to add on that?
Thank you.
This page is just for general volume to give you an idea of the number of permits going through each review agency. I hope you're at least a little bit overwhelmed by all the different permit types and all the numbers in the high hundreds that you're seeing. The percentages are just change from last year, given that we still have a couple weeks left in the year. But just volume, like almost 5,000 building and mechanical, electrical, plumbing inspections performed this year, hundreds of parking permits, hundreds of tree permits, hundreds of all these different types of engineering and ComDev permits. So there's a lot that we're doing a really good job of keeping moving through the system without too much trouble. Just to put it in context of some of the larger projects and like recurring big complaints or problem areas.
Just one small question as I'm continuing to absorb all this. What do we mean by county water?
The utilities department is responsible for a certain number of county water permits as well. It's the same team, and they have city water permits and county water permits, similar processes.
So they're the extra traditional ones outside the city limits that have water service agreements with us?
That's exactly right.
Okay, just wondering what that meant by that title. Thank you. Other questions from anyone? No. Okay, please continue.
This one is round one review times. When we were first instructed by Sarah Ott to, reduce, and council, to reduce round one review times immediately. That was Q2 of 2023. And this is anonymous. These are all the review agencies that contribute to the big ComDev permits. So each one of these represents planning or building or utilities or water. And this is the number of days in the queue on average each quarter from the beginning of 2023 to now. Clearly, just to emphasize that council's directive, city management's directive has been taken very seriously. We've gotten these down, we've held it. And I use this graph to systematically just look at who's at the top, and then we workshop, figure out where our bottlenecks are, figure out what we can do to either improve public communications or our internal processes to kind of drive these down and keep them down. So I love this graph. I think it's shown everyone has been on board and making a real genuine effort to meet the community on this.
And when there are a bit of the spikes, as we might call them, is this because you're not tracking the more complicated permits that go through at the same time on the bottom, but that's where there might be spikes in either volume or time and complexity of the permits?
Or staffing.
Or staffing.
Sometimes I can point to like a specific person and be like, well, that's when that person left, or that's when this person got, you know? So yeah, it's a bit of a mix of all of that.
Thank you.
And I think it speaks a little bit to how challenging it is to, like, we hear of a concern, or we hear of a particular trend that might be happening that maybe members of the development community, and to like go into the number of folks that are involved, the number of like points at which something might have gone awry or something might be taking a little bit of time, and to like point to that particular permit and say, oh yeah, this is an outlier. This is one that we know we kind of fell short on. Some of these spikes are really a permit or two within one referral agency who, for could be 10 different reasons
Right.
Why things are moving up and down. But I to Sydney's point, I do think that this kind of evaluation has helped us put our finger on things with individual review agencies that could be important process improvements.
Thank you for that.
So first is 2024, second is 2025. These are the number of review rounds required for each permit type. So, first, the solid blue ones are our affidavit program that we rolled out last year. Those are in and out in one review round, no questions asked. So that's 100%. That's pretty good. The other thing I'd like to call out on this slide, just at the margins, we had a few holdovers where it was like, oh, this additional info took another round, this repair. Epics, if you guys want to look at epics, they're the ones solidly in the middle. Those are our expedited permits in the core. We've gotten rid of the third round of review on those entirely. I would like to credit our pre-submittal process and requiring all document submissions up front in that meeting for review. That kind of keeps people from coming back for these, like, we weren't doing too bad on some of these superfluous seeming review rounds, but for majors, minors, epics, additional info, repairs, we've been able to kind of do a better job of clearing the air and not inviting people back for subsequent rounds of review.
And a round of review, just to understand, that can translate into a few weeks on a big permit, on a major. Getting rid of a review round can cut off weeks of time and back and forth between the applicant team and staff. So we see it as a really important thing as we move forward, is trying to reduce review rounds as a mechanism to improve.
It's an administrative closeout, it's a request on the applicant, a coordination with their team, a resubmittal to our team, and administrative processing before opening it up to the reviewers for an additional review round. So. You have seen this before. A version of it is up on our timelines page. We presented it first the last time we spoke to you about development services and development review. Minor changes, it's updated to 2025 numbers, converted to weeks, an easier number to digest, I've been told. And one thing I will say, because I was asked this a few times by staff today, the 2 weeks that I'm giving for minor permits, and then you'll see on the next slide I'm giving 4 weeks for the applicant response. That is me being generous. to the applicant. That was maybe like our lower third of applicants who are really just on it. Like if there's a team and they're submitting, they're resubmitting, they're getting their comments back, I'll give them 2 weeks, and then that will be the average timeline for this. But some people do wait months and months to resubmit and then complain that their permit is taking forever, but that is not what this is reflecting. I'm just using a consolidated sort of response time. And let's see, the details from this study regularly get added into our website materials. They've informed reformatting of specific documents, questions we ask at pre-submittals. So whenever we're kind of flagged about an item that is causing multiple projects to go into re-review needed, I think we've been making like pretty like systematic attempts to ask the next question, which is how can we give this to the applicant up front so it becomes less of a re-review issue.
Yeah, and so to clarify, the 2-week blue blocks, you're saying that's really up to the applicant themselves?
Yes.
And I certainly have seen some, whether it's in the county or the city, where the applicant will disappear for 9 months before they reapply. And then, of course, it's staff's fault it's so late. But I appreciate, would you say 2 weeks is an average turnaround, or is it more like a month between these?
I would say like the lower, like third, like the quickest third of applicants on minors would be 2 weeks. So
Okay.
it's not really it's not a 50-50 average, but like maybe like a third.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just trying to look real quickly and I didn't see it. I was just wondering if you had like an FAQ question on the ComDev portion of your website, because I gotta imagine you get a lot of the same questions over and over and over again. So if you don't, then that might be nice. And basically in that vein, just wondering if could add a section to the website, basically an explanation. And I don't know how complicated it gets because not all permits are the same, of just how to get your permit through expeditiously. Because you have a great pre-application process, but I do think about a lot of the permits you probably get come from some people that are relatively ignorant to the process, and that probably slows it up as well. So as much pre-information as they can have that you answer constantly might be helpful. And then just even for some of the bigger permits, the people that are professionals at this, still having that information on how to get your permit through expeditiously really does a lot more to put the onus on them to do things correctly the first time, because the information is there in public and out there.
Yeah, nice, Sam.
Yeah. There are a few key websites that I'd love to talk about. There's the Document Resource Library, which is built to be kind of like a checklist. There's also a permit process overview page that whatever we could do to get that out there, I would be willing, because I think they're great. They've outlined all the different steps of a permit and what each status means and expectations associated both on the applicant side and what we're promising. So that exists. There's also a Salesforce support, a permit portal support page with those FAQs, like what status is my review in, how to add a contact, who's my permit owner, things like that get added to the permit portal support page.
See that?
And then on the timelines page, we've done our best to outline clearly, there's an intake timeline that you need to be prepared for. There's a first round of review timeline that varies widely depending on what kind of permit it is. And then there's re-review timelines that are separate from your round one timelines. So please take a look. My email signature is full of them. And like I said, if there's anything we can do to get those out, would love that.
Newsletter, so.
Well, it makes me think, as archaic as this may seem, of doing a few printout packets and just having them there for people to pick up. Just it's there in hard copy. I know a lot of people, it's all online, but then that gets confusing. And sometimes going from page 5 online back to page 1 is more complicated than being able to read through a instructions manual of some sort. So, you know, they are great resources. It's not as if, but sometimes people have a hard time finding the resource they're supposed to. You know, it just sounds silly, but it's just, oh yeah, I'll look at that website later. Is a different answer than, oh, I'll take this with me.
Yeah.
So that might be one small way.
We've started putting like QRs and pamphlets outside of, you know, like engineering and ComDev departments, and I know it's not quite a packet, but
Yeah, well, just think about it in the future, you know, it just might, it probably won't help 9 out of 10 people, and one person, it'll say, oh, that's just what I needed.
I mean, I'll just say bottom line for me when it comes to ComDev and how complicated it is, I just would want you and the applicants to learn from all the mistakes of the past and be smart in that sense of this is how this application ended up going 4 rounds, and this is how you avoid that, and having that information readily available. So once again, the onus is on them, and if any new mistakes come up, what can you do about that? But if old mistakes keep repeating themselves, I think that's where issues are clearly stated.
Yeah, we're frustrated by that too. And I do think that's exactly kind of what's shaping our thinking about this stuff, is trying to go through that kind of analysis with a little bit of data behind it, and also some anecdotal conversations with individual applicants. Okay.
Okay.
major, same.
I will say, though, on this one, 82% approved after round 4, even being generous to the applicant in terms of, a 4-week turnaround after review comments on this one. The timescale is a little bit longer. I mean, we're talking 50 weeks for a permit, and 82%, 1 in 5 not being issued at that time period. I've said statements like this to council before. That's a long timeline, and in a lot of communities, that would be absolutely unacceptable. And I do think that there's, as we get to that, we've improved those numbers that are getting up to that timeline, but we'll talk about that at the end of the conversation this evening. But just know that I think, a year for a permit issuance, it's a long time. We acknowledge that.
Law has changed, a lot more expensive.
Would you classify major permits as sometimes being residential, complicated residential homes, but other times more like a Lift 1A?
They fit. There's both major permits, commercial and residential. You want to talk about that distinction at all, or what threshold sort of get into the major?
Yeah, with majors, we're looking at any kind of addition, new construction, so that would be on both the residential and commercial side.
Thank you.
I left some of them out of this timeline projection.
Okay.
All right, so some examples of changes that we've made based on the data that we just showed. I talked a little bit about some of it. As we come across data points where we're like, why is there this spike? Why are we hearing this complaint? We investigate that, and then things get squirreled away into those different web pages that I spoke to you about. Either something gets clarified on the document resource library in the form of a checklist, or a clarification for like a trigger. A document gets updated with the information that the review team needs rephrased or more prominently placed so that it's less likely to be missed. So we're constantly making these like little tinkering adjustments based off of the feedback we're getting. Like I mentioned, requesting all the submittal documents at Epics. And then internal SOP efforts for different review agencies, just to make sure that your experience with one zoning reviewer isn't different than another. It's making sure that we're just trying to streamline the process for all involved.
Thank you.
Key messages in general: volume remains high, hundreds of reviews and inspections and permit types being issued across all review agencies, and then we're still working really strongly together on these like big projects. Major projects remain a bottleneck, often pulling our most experienced reviewers off of keeping things moving just so they can like sit down and really focus on these massive projects we have going on. But we want to call out projects having fewer review rounds, successfully navigating those conversations to keep people from having to re-enter the queue. We've held our review round 1 times. And again, public information, we're constantly updating those. So however we can get the word out, we can put them in the newsletter more regularly. They've definitely been there before, and yeah.
This is a kind of a weird question for everyone, but have we ever thought about doing a newsletter that was just to the development community, real estate community? You know, because when you say community newsletter, I'm thinking about the broader community newsletter. But maybe there should be a quarterly or 3 times a year just to the
We have a
development.
community development specific web newsletter that goes out
Okay.
bi-weekly. So that's mostly the design community that
Okay.
signs up for that. But still
Yeah, no,
trying
I
to get
just
the
was
word
hearing
out.
all this put in the community newsletter stuff. I was thinking, but if we're already doing something,
We have a specific listserv for community development customers or people who have gone online and specifically requested it.
okay, perfect for these sort of changes. Thank you.
Sydney's going to continue with this next set of slides. These are just, again, a breakdown of, again, some specific things that we've done over the last couple of years in response to data and direction from city leadership over the last couple of years.
These come from the raw list that I think Ben and Pete talked about a couple months ago, just a little list of wins. So we've spent a lot of time focused on queue organization and prioritization amongst the review agencies this year. So making sure that when they log into Salesforce and they access their queue, they have all the information they need there to make a mini go faster than a major, or to make a like for like to ground everyone in what they're being asked of in each review kind of at a glance, so that we can kind of keep things moving appropriately. I'm working on a standard operating procedures, like cultural reform, in which we get really excited about spring cleaning for our SOPs and make sure that they don't just die in a dusty corner somewhere and they actually get revisited. So that's in process amongst all the review teams. There have been blitz days, buildings started blitz days, and that has been catching on with other review agencies where it's okay to just put your head down and not go to meetings and just focus on review. And we have some internal groups that have been enjoying a refocusing around like prioritization conversations. So it's like bringing people together, not so often that it's cumbersome, but often enough that they're still familiar with each other and everyone's concerns. But our Salesforce core meeting has been doing a really good job of sidebarring and coming to consensus on different asks for the system. Cutting steps from the review and administrative processes. These are things like creating affidavits for like processes, taking steps that used to happen in a separate system, Municipay, and bringing those into Salesforce. If they happen at the same time as the Salesforce permit, why can't we just do all that in Salesforce? So environmental health, they can charge fees and all of their licensing things in Salesforce instead of duplicating those efforts. We've been asking questions about the district versus historical resource when it comes to HP being a reviewer on different building permits. Public information. I cannot overemphasize how often we are tinkering with our public information. So if there are suggestions from the public, staff, whatever, it makes its way onto the website somewhere in an attempt to build that bridge. We hosted a mix and mingle this year between planned reviewers and staff. It was a success. There will be another one this winter, as soon as I get my library card renewed. Cover stamps, email templates, in an attempt to make sure it's really clear what applicants are expected to do at different parts in the process. and affidavit programs. This has also been called over-the-counter permits. The fenestration one has been going really well. There have been some questions when it comes to historic preservation. So we're working on that. We kind of recently went back to the drawing board on those around historic preservation. Water remains in process. Utilities and water and engineering are kind of working out their process for fees. And condo remodels are still on deck.
And just a little bit more about what this means, because it's a pretty big departure for us. When we say an affidavit, this is something that the applicant signs that says, I understand the code, I understand what I'm submitting, and when I complete this project, it will be compliant with the code. And so it really cuts down staff review of these things that we feel is a fairly low threshold of risk that can be subject to less review for us and put a little bit more responsibility on the applicant in terms of them making sure that their project's ultimately compliant. These things are getting inspected by our staff in the end, but the review process is significantly sped up under this. And the condo remodels it's gonna be a big change. Sometimes those reviews can take months. And sometimes that's necessary. They're getting involved in wall assemblies and multifamily units, but sometimes they're literally just, changing out all the surfaces in the condo. They're putting bathrooms back in their exact locations. They're putting their kitchen back in the same locations, but with updated fixtures. And we think that that's a place where we can really make some inroads in terms of speeding up people's expectations on those kinds of things. And we do a lot of them.
I bet. A lot of our condos are old.
Do you have an inspection for every one of those that signs an affidavit, or is it a sample?
In order for a permit to get its certificate of occupancy or letter of completion, building permits, anyway.
Okay.
Thank you.
Some things we have in the works, mentioned some things already going well with the EPIC process, and we're kind of workshopping.
And for the public, what is the EPIC?
Expedited permits in the core.
Okay, thank you.
So we were able to get rid of all the round threes on that, and there's kind of a desire to bring a lot of the pre-submittal work that goes on in an EPIC into the system, so that's meaningfully captured. So it's not just being deferred to an invisible part of the process. So we're gonna bring that into Salesforce. Working on the affidavit process, vendor assessment, we got a lot of money to take a look at what our system is doing well, what it could be doing better, and that remains in process. It's been very illuminating.
When we say vendor assessment, we're talking about the folks that help support Salesforce.
Right.
We have some automated alert system inquiries that we've got going on right now that I will be so happy to see implemented. Yeah.
So Sydney, Bonnie, myself, we'd be happy to answer any questions about the data or any of that previous presentation, but we're going to be switching gears over to the planning function here on the next slide. So
Okay.
happy to answer any questions or take any comments.
John?
No questions, but I do have some comments.
Okay.
So, having lived here as long as I have, it's my observation that the permitting process is difficult here because of the wants and needs of the homeowners and developers, many with above-average affluence, drives elaborate, large, technologically advanced, and very complex homes. I imagine the permitting process in Walsenburg is quite simple by comparison. We've all seen creative developers exploit loopholes and/or ask forgiveness for what I'll call stretching the rules, and the code changes have to be made to keep up with closing these loopholes, and that explains a lot of the process to me. And because of this, I'm understanding of the difficulties inherent here, and I'm sympathetic to both staff and the public because the simple, easy permits have to get in line with complex permits and change orders. So I really appreciate all the work that's being done on this front. And I'd also like to hear, not now, but in the future, some positive comments that we get from people who are happy with the permitting process, because I know there are some.
I can leave you with like one good comment, not just one, but our affidavits, our epics, our minis, our repairs, our roofs, and our IFFRs all on average take less than 30 days in city hands. So that's like 6 different not insignificant building permit types. So I was proud of that.
One other big win we had this past week was the jazz space opening up on the Cooper Street Mall. We got a lot of positive feedback from their development team and their ability to get that project completed on schedule and open to the public.
Quick question, were there any change orders involved with that?
Oh,
Just a few.
Okay,
Not too many on the jazz tenant finish itself.
understood, yeah. Thanks.
And I will also say, you know, I think on the permit side particularly, I mean, ultimately, our number one job is to make sure that these projects are being built safely and consistent with our codes. And, you know, are there things that occasionally slip through the cracks? Yes, there are, in terms of those two outcomes. But I really think very highly of care and concern that our review folks across, you know, the review agencies, whether they're looking at trees or whether they're looking at historic preservation outcomes. I will just say that the vast majority of development that happens in this community is being done safely per very complicated codes, reflective of community expectations and outcomes. And I think, you know, I think ultimately that's a reflection of our staff and staff's attention to that, and also applicants being willing to work with us on those things. You know, I think this community continues to look the way that it does and function the way that it does because of this process. Does it take time? Yes. Is it expensive? Yes. And, you know, are there things that we could simplify? But I will just say, in terms of some of those really high-level outcomes that we're pursuing, I think we're successful. The timelines, can we improve? Yes. And so I guess that's where I'd leave that.
Thank you.
This next section is shifting gears a little bit. This is moving over to the planning function. We have provided a little bit of information over time to City Council about how this project was progressing, but we're to a point where we can start taking some action on the work that Baseline Engineering has been helping us with over the last year, 18 months. We've done a fairly deep dive in our planning process, and I'm going to turn things over to Dan Folk to talk a little bit about where we are and the kinds of things that we're focusing on. But really, this is in land use, historic preservation, zoning processes, which, again, related, intersecting with the permit process, but typically happens before something we get to permit.
All right, thank you, Ben. Good evening, Mayor and council members. And so first, let's talk a little bit about the information I'm going to go over. This is the result, as Ben mentioned, of the work that Baseline Engineering has done over the last really 2 years. And so starting in 2024, Baseline worked with our staff, with the community, with people that submit applications to the city. So they did a lot of interviews, they reviewed our code, they reviewed our process, they reviewed Salesforce, I'm sure spent a lot of time talking with Sydney. And so the result of that is what I'm going to be talking about, some of the priorities that we've identified. There are 2 attachments to tonight's presentation. One was online and available to everyone, which is the executive summary, which is prepared by Baseline. And then there's an Exhibit B, which is a very large spreadsheet. And so I think we've provided you that, I think, as a separate document. If folks online want to see that, I believe the instruction on the agenda is to contact Ben and we can share that spreadsheet. But just there were some formatting issues with getting that uploaded. The spreadsheet itself identified about 130, maybe plus 1 or 2 there, topics that were identified, and then it has a lot of information about how to implement that, and they were all prioritized. And so we've broken this down into about 4 different categories that I'm going to talk about. So this first group are things that would potentially require a policy shift or like an amendment to the city code. primarily the zoning code. And so in that code, we talk a lot about the process, right? So if you file this type of application, this is the process you have to follow. And so in order to change some of that, it might require a code amendment. Within our work for historic preservation, we've got 2 historic districts, the core historic district and then the Main Street district. And within those districts, you've got properties that are individually designated. We sometimes call those contributing properties. And then you've got properties that are non-designated or non-contributing within a historic district. And so we want to look at how we treat those 2 different types of projects. Right now, both are subject, if you're in one of those districts, to these design standards. And so some of this relates to historic buildings, some relates to non-historic. And so we're looking at ways to kind of streamline that, and if there's projects, particularly with non-designated properties, find some efficiencies in how to review that. Part of that is looking at the type of the work that needs to get reviewed, helps us make that decision if there's a more administrative way versus taking it to the commission, and then clarifying our design guidelines. In addition to these, the ones I've shown you for the commercial districts in the Main Street, and then the character districts, we also have historic preservation guidelines, which are specific to designated properties. And those are based on the Secretary of the Interior standards. Then the next group, we've identified our review level thresholds. So again, as dictated or directed in the code, which cases have to come to City Council. Typically, they'll have a recommendation from Planning and Zoning Commission or the Historic Preservation Commission, occasionally the Board of Adjustment. Which ones can we review at the staff level, which are administrative, and then there are some that actually go to the commissions, and it's within their purview. So looking at those processes and where can we find efficiencies, really emphasizing trying to get more on the administrative side, things that you would all be comfortable with staff reviewing. And then looking at the land use review versus the permit review. So the first half of this was talking about building permits, and we do a zoning review for building permits, and then we have the land use review, which is sometimes called an entitlement. So you may have to amend your zoning, get a major development plan approved. And so can we find efficiencies in certain applications where we do them concurrently, or perhaps it's just a permit review and we don't need to do the land use review?
And just to kind of simplify that even further, it takes a lot of staff time and a lot of applicant time to get a case in front of you folks. Going down, it takes a lot of time to get to P&Z and HPC. That takes time. Administrative land use cases take significantly less time. And what takes the littlest amount of time is reviewing something during the permit. So you're not even doing a land use application. And so we're really trying to do some analysis of, from our perspective, and I think Baseline's perspective, our code is really process heavy and has been for a very long time. And unusually there are things that come to City Council that there probably aren't very many communities that require those kinds of conversations to happen at City Council. Those things could either happen at the staff level or at a planning and zoning commission level rather than bringing those things to you. So, and ideally, we take even a larger subsection of things that we view all the way down to permit review so that people are simply having to have their projects looked at once as opposed to land use and then permit. I will say that in some of the timelines that Sydney's trying to work on, that intersection is often a major factor in terms of ultimate project timelines.
And I'll say on that last slide, I was going to mention some of the volume numbers that Sydney had shared. One of the reasons we need to do this is it is very staff intensive. I think historic preservation had 236 permits and 366 inspections by planning and zoning. So that's a lot of time. They're not just in the office. They actually go out and look at these projects as well. Thanks, Ben. So the next bucket is looking at process and customer service standardization. One of the things we need to really strive to do is provide consistent review timelines and process flows. I think the city's done a pretty amazing job the last couple of years developing those timelines, getting those process flows up on our website. I think we need to continue to promote that information, like Sam was asking about, getting folks to come and look at that stuff ahead of time. Sydney, I think, updates some of that based on real time, like what's happening during that last quarter. And so we try to keep those current. I think we can do a little better job probably on the land use side of explaining the timelines. probably catch up a little bit with the work that's been done on the permit side. And then resetting communication expectations. Obviously, everything we do, communication is so critical. There's a lot of internal communication that goes on to coordinate all of this, and then a lot of external communication, right? So communicating with our applicants about they've submitted a land use application, you know, where is it in the process? When's it going to get in front of the commission? Is there information you need from me? Same thing on the permit side, just kind of these open lines of communications, setting expectations and giving updates. It can be time intensive, but it's a big part of customer service. And again, I think a lot of this is training. Some of Ben's notes, I think, were key there. We can move on. Oh, I did want to mention on this one, we have developed FAQs, so we get a lot of frequently asked questions. We have a planner of the day, we have a builder of the day. We've taken a lot of those questions we get on the pod, planner of the day, and we've done in FAQs. We've done sample applications, so like here's what I call an A paper looks like. You know, if you submit an A paper, you're going to get better review time. If you submit a C and a D paper, it may take a little more effort, probably a resubmittal. And we're doing those review blitzes as well, the building blitzes, where our people reviewing the building permits on the zoning side are just spending the day doing that review rather than going to meetings. So I think everyone's enjoyed it. They've made a lot of progress.
If I can jump in, one blitz day for zoning, they did like 22. They knocked it out. The queue it was so good.
So this
Good,
is
good,
Sophie
good.
and her team. They're doing an amazing job. All right, staffing, organization, training, and professional development. We always want to be developing our teams. Obviously, onboarding is very time intensive. There's a lot of training with new employees. You want to try to keep those folks on so you're not onboarding new people every year, hopefully. I feel pretty good. I think we all do about some of our recent hires. So again, it's pretty intensive to onboard them, but we're hoping to keep them. One of the things we're looking at breaking down a little bit is the function between the planning side, which is doing the land use entitlement review, and the zoning side, which is doing the building permit review, is having a lot of organizations, it's the same group of planners doing that. Here we have it very siloed. I think there'd be some real advantages to having a group of planners kind of mixing in the work. And so a planner would potentially review a project from the time it got entitled, like a plan development, all the way through permit. So then they would look at it during the building permit review as well, because they have the most familiarity with that project. And so we're looking at doing that, kind of cross-training, sharing the work a little bit. And then staff development is so critical. We have a great mix of people here. You know, we've got a great core group that have been here in that 5 to 7 year range, and then we've got a group that's been here in the 1 to 2 year range, and 1 and less, and we've just hired 3 more people this year. And so it's a great mix of some real experienced folks with some newer folks. We just need to continue to work on staff development and training, and I think the cross-training, not only does it give us more efficiencies when we lose people, and we've got people who can fill in, but I think people enjoy their work more, quite frankly, and that helps with retention.
I will say one of the positive things, and I mentioned this in the memo, I do think for the first time since I've been with the city of Aspen, going back to 2016, we are fully staffed. Planning, building, zoning, reviewers, inspectors, department leadership, we are fully staffed right now. And so I do think, to Dan's point, like, we've made some really great hires of some very smart, young, dedicated folks, and we need to do right by them of bringing them up to speed with their particular job functions. And so we're giving a lot of thought to how to do that, because it's a complicated point. I remember Jen Phelan, when I started as a Planner 1 in 2016, she said, it's going to take you 2 years before you feel confident in the words coming out of your mouth. That was about right. But
And look at you now.
and look at, yeah, who knows? Yeah. But I will say that, you know, it's a huge focus of ours right now.
Very good.
I have a
It's
question.
Christine?
Yeah. Is there one, if you apply for a major, even a minor permit, is there one person that guides you, kind of sees you through that entire process? I mean, you have Salesforce and you can check in there, but is there kind of like, I hate to use the word concierge, but.
I think the closest that we have are Sydney and her team.
Okay.
And I will say there's going to be a slide up here about more significant changes that we could make that might align us with what some other organizations do. But I will say that if you've got one of those big projects, you're probably talking to 10 or 12 different people across the city and other review agencies, and you're getting comments back from 10 or 12 different folks. We've tried to do some really good things in coordinating those so that we're not getting incremental submissions. You hear from engineering and you respond, you hear from planning, you respond. We've tried to sort of coordinate that better, and we've got some electronic tools that allow us to do that in a more organized fashion right now. But I will say, it would require some radical changes in how we do business, but I do think the question you're asking is an important one, and something that I think other communities have adopted, of really trying to cut down the number of people that are working on a particular permit.
And then from like land use to building permit, those are treated entirely separately. And we're trying to bridge our gap so it's not so much of a rough transition.
Ben and I have had this discussion. Having a single point of contact is a really big customer service component.
Yeah.
It can really alleviate a lot of problems, but it'd be a pretty big thing to implement, but I think we're up for it.
And I will say one of the interesting things about this community, and this is perhaps a different conversation for another day, but I was the planner on Lift One Lodge when it went through 6 years ago. And so it's from the time of land use entitlement up to permit issuance can sometimes be 5 or 6 years. And so it's a challenge with that of having, consistent staffing and consistent kind of institutional knowledge across those kinds of timelines where, from the very first application to where a project is constructed and getting a certificate of occupancy, those are long timelines, and it's a challenge in our context. We're not building, tract homes that are identical to each other. We're often building these very bespoke projects that on very interesting timelines. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Just to tag in on that and your response, when your comment is the first time we've been fully staffed since 2016, I understand the turnover and the challenge that many departments have had and the reasons. But I want you to take a hard look and say, well, should our staffing levels be even higher than they were then? And if we're going to get to more of this one-person point contact and protect the sanity and the workload of the remaining staff, let us know. We need to know if to really fully implement this plan more completely. And, with, as you have detailed, the fairly demanding development criteria that our community expects between environmental concerns and runoff and water and neighbors and wildlife and everything else, you need to let us know.
Okay.
Because that's just, it's great. It's great we're finally up to that level, but it's almost like the police department in my mind where we overhire so that if someone retires unexpectedly, there's not a 6-month gap before they can fill that hole. And knowing, again, it's similar to the police department. They got a special event every weekend. They got something every weekend. When does there a break? There's not. And I want to make sure that this office is fully supported as well as functioning well. And sometimes that might mean a new person at some level in some mix of this whole reinvention process and simplification process you're doing. So, you can only rearrange the deck chairs so much because then there's only so much seating. And if we need more seating on the deck chairs, you let us know.
Thank you so much for that support.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I want to second that, Rachel, because I'm acutely aware of the stresses that the permitting process has on staff.
And people in the public.
And people in the public, but
Yeah.
I'm actually talking about staff right now because it's not only the workload, but it was also the fact that they weren't fully staffed and there was a lot of turnover. So I'm just really glad to hear this news that turnover stabilized and you're fully staffed. But yeah, if we need more employees, please let us know, because you're an important cog in this machine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, and then the last slide I'm going to talk about is our administrative and record keeping. Again, it's just kind of a outcome of time, I think, and work, and over time, records have been kept in different ways, and they've been archived in different ways. And so the whole organization spends time on core requests. I think community development gets quite a bit more than others. So Colorado Open Records requests. And so this is largely tied to, that's a big part of it, is when we get a core request, efficiently being able to find those records and provide them to the public. But there's work to be done here, and we're going to work
Are
on
most of
that.
our records digitized, or are some of them older? What state are we in right now?
You know, I think there was an important transition in 2019 where we started taking things in electronically, both on the land use side and the permit side. And while that sounds great, the flow between Salesforce and Laserfiche, which is where our repository of all of our records are, Bluebeam, which is where we do all of our markups and comments on permits, those things don't work very well with each other. And so we've struggled a little bit to have that be a really nicely organized flow. We're making some improvements right now. Our scan stuff up until 2019 is difficult to search on, but it's all there.
Okay.
And we're working on both on the permit side and the land use application side of having that same sort of accessibility within Laserfiche. It's fully at the fingertips of the public. And we've got some additional work to do, but once we identify the right electronic document, it's really easy to convey that to the public. It's just the searching of these things is not yet where we would like it to be. So we're working with everybody that's identified up there to come up with a better system for these documents.
Jim?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any questions? I think you've asked some really good questions on the planning function. Just wanted to, before we kind of move to the conclusion of the discussion today, wanted to give a chance to ask any questions about the baseline study or any of the work on the planning side of things before we move on to concluding this discussion. Okay. At the very end of the memo, in the alternatives section, I called out kind of 3 responses that we haven't necessarily engaged in because they're not incremental. They're much more abrupt and are like fairly significant structural changes to how we've been conducting development review at the city for the last few decades. One is a reduction and simplification of provisions within our regulatory framework. I will just say that has not been Aspen's story over the years. We have created a layer cake of often very complex regulations that are very much tied to really important community concerns and outcomes. And so I will say that we would need to significantly do a deep dive look at regulations across referral agencies and start with a fairly significant redlining exercise of things that maybe the community isn't as interested in today as they once were, that staff continue to spend some time on. We're willing to go through that exercise, but it is not an insignificant thing. And I also think it's probably something that would be related to
New AACP.
a redux of the AACP. So to try to identify some of those categories of topics where we want to engage in this kind of effort. We've had one-off conversations with City Council about those kinds of things from time to time. But I think if we were really to make a move on these timelines that I think are, cause consternation for people, we'd need to engage in that to some degree.
Sorry to jump in there. I'm just saying a lot of it is very complicated. Some of it I do appreciate when you follow a lead and one that's like very much not being used or the outcome is not as intended, because that's what I think of when I think of, because this community does have a layer cake of regulations, but some of them act in an opposite effect of what this community is looking for, and that's where I'd look to you to come to us and be like, yeah, we got a lead on one that maybe is not working as you hoped it would be.
Yeah, and I will say, like, the historic preservation stuff that we identified in the planning function a couple of slides ago, that's at the top of the list. We created a very, very heavy process related to that stuff, and it is creating a bottleneck both in land use applications and in building permit review. And so it's really at the top of our list, because I think that we can still maintain historic preservation outcomes and make the process a lot better for everybody with some code changes.
Okay, very good.
So that's an example of that. The other, what would be a sea change for us, and again, other communities do this, but change the level of responsibility for applicants in gaining compliance as the project moves through review to completion. Certainly by the time something gets a certificate of occupancy, we've inspected it, it's compliant with our codes, et cetera, et cetera. But at the beginning of the permit process, we do an awful lot of work internally with staff to make sure that drawings as they're coming into us are fully compliant. A lot of communities, when they get an application in, they see something that they have concerns with, they'll do a red line, send it back to the applicant and say, issued. You guys fix this, and when you go to build it, make sure it's compliant. I'm simplifying that a little bit. Bonnie could talk for days about this, but I do think that that adds to rounds of review. You know, when we're requiring plans to be fully reflective of compliance with our codes, we're asking for additional, updates to drawings, et cetera, over time. And I do think that that would be a sea change for us. And it's a thing that, in terms of building safety and compliance with a complex regulatory environment, staff would need to be brought along on this topic, because I think we have concerns with taking those kinds of moves and having buildings be compliant when we're being asked to issue a certificate of occupancy at the end. And so it puts a lot more onus on the applicants to respond to kind of initial comments or concerns, and go straight to permit when we have identified issues that they haven't fully responded to yet. We are starting to make this move, like the affidavit process that we talked about previously. Like, that's a move in this direction. But it is kind of a shift in whose responsibility is what to make sure that a project's compliant as it's getting constructed. And I do think that right now we require projects to be fully compliant in their drawings when we're issuing a permit. And it just takes a ton of time to get there with applicants.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, and I really want to go down more the list of pros and cons. I would imagine that the project under construction is still being inspected repeatedly at various levels. So the electricity or the plumbing is inspected before the drywall goes up. But I can also imagine cases where someone did not comply, and they drywalled it in before the electric guys got there to check it. And now you're going to have to tell the developer, you have to take that drywall down so we can double check the electricity, because they thought they had their permit in hand and they just kept rolling. So, I mean, I can see some real challenges that might come out of that type of process. And we've all seen examples where it's not until a neighbor comes in and says, I think that's 1.5 feet over height. Or that someone comes in and says, well, this doesn't seem to be compliant with what you asked me to do, but can we go to council and ask for a waiver now that it's already constructed, or now that it's already in the center of our building? And so I could see where you could end up with some real challenges there. On the other hand, I'm wondering, as you're already seeing with some types of projects, whether an affidavit process would work and be legitimate. And so, I think we're just not going to get there on the big and the major projects, but to the extent we look for more opportunities with the small projects, or even if it's a kind of a single step review of have you come back and been able to tell us how you're going to respond to these things? I'm going to leave it to you to think about, but I can see where there's the majors and the minors, and which in between could have a little more of this type of process you're talking about.
Okay. And then lastly, and this was brought up recently, but just to kind of emphasize that we're thinking about it, and it's definitely a topic that we give consideration to. But a lot of communities, they have a single person that sort of reviews different levels of permits, either or reducing the number. We have done some consolidation of reviews where our building plans examiners will do environmental health reviews or simple water reviews as part of the building permit. But I think to really make strides on this, if we were to go down this path, would take a really significant reorganization of staff and the way that we think about our individual codes. Not that it's impossible, but again, not small steps to implement any of these three things. And we've thought through some of the trade-offs that might come forward with some of these, but they would be significant changes the way that we've generally done permit review for at least the last couple decades. So with that, I think our continuing commitments to continue to improve public information, to use the data that we're getting better at acquiring out of Salesforce, and really targeting process improvements based on that data, identifying areas where we can reasonably place well-informed responsibility for compliance on applicants. That's a lot of words, but to really sort of build trust in some of the things that we, I think, struggle to give trust to. And then lastly, and I really applaud Sydney on this effort to do a much better job and to continue to improve on internal alignments across review agencies. So those are things that we think are continued things that we need to be paying attention to on a daily basis as we think about how we work with each other and with our customers. And so with that context, we asked you a couple of questions, and this is the last slide, I promise. 2 questions, and I'm going to start with number 2 because I think it's a little bit more discrete and limited. We've put some data points up on the screen and in the memo, and wanted to see if there were any other kinds of framing of data or visualizations of data that might be helpful for council to see on a regular basis. I think as staff, those volume numbers are important to us as we're thinking about things. The timelines, the milestones. The milestone that we advertise most directly to the public is our first run review timelines for various types of permits. That's an important milestone for us. So I guess the question is, what kinds of data would you folks like to see, and what kind of frequency?
Well, let me ask Ben, what has been the frequency in the past? Is it just random?
It's been very intermittent. It's been kind of directed at work sessions. I will say, Sarah was wanting us to have some more regular identification of key performance indicators. Have started that conversation with Pete.
Okay.
And I think it's.
So it's been random in the past. That was just my question.
Yeah, it's been random in the past.
Would, now let's talk about among council, would 3 times a year be sufficient? I would, or twice a year, because I would think that quarterly is almost too small, and can be blown out by 1 or 2 incidences, but maybe once a year is too little. Pete, you have a thought?
Well, I just wanted to relay some of Bill's comments because you had asked me a little bit about trying to make sure that he was represented, given he wasn't able to attend tonight. Bill had a few thoughts, and I know Ben has heard these already, but I don't know if the rest of council has and the public. Bill's statements were a little bit more around sharing some anonymous customer satisfaction scores and trying to make sure that there was some feedback that was making it back to the council table as well, just so you heard some of the general statements that kind of came in periodically. There was definitely mention of quarterly reporting, both for permit processing timelines and change orders. Also on average min and max timelines to receive pre-app meetings and pre-app summaries. And then average response times to customer inquiries about process and requirements. And his last note was that the valuation, dollar value basically tied to the permit work wasn't really a metric that he valued so much.
Okay.
So those were his comments around data.
I would agree that any more frequently than quarterly I think would be skewed.
Yeah. So
quarter-
quarterly is just about,
I think quarterly could be useful. I think twice annually could be useful. I think annually is too infrequent.
right.
And so, my leanings are towards quarterly. I'd be hesitant to suggest monthly.
No. We don't want to waste time making reports.
Yeah. We're concerned about that as well. And I will just kind of differentiate. I do think our capacity right now, like at this moment, to report out of the building permit process, because of the really clear milestones that we have set up for the permitting process in Salesforce, that's easy. We can provide however you folks want to see that, and we can continue to play around with the best way to visualize that. I will say the place that we don't have very good data on timelines is in the planning function. It's pretty iterative. Again, it's even more human. If we're going to talk about that dynamic both on the applicant side and on staff side. So I will say that is a place where we can do fundamentally a better job of trying to track timelines, particularly on land use reviews. So I do want to say that. So because one of the bullet points that Bill mentioned were on pre-apps and pre-app summary turnarounds. It's a topic of concern for me. I think we take too long on occasion to do those, to get those things produced by the department. We do a lot of them a year, but they take some time. And so that's a data point that I would support, tracking and doing a better job of reporting on that. So, but in general, as a general rule, the data that was kind of presented tonight, do those kinds of things resonate with folks?
Yes. John and then Christine will come down the line.
I'm not sure if anybody else appreciated this as much as I did, and I'm not sure if this would be appropriate to share with the public, but I really like the map of Aspen that was presented to us 6, 8, 10 months ago that had all the open building permits, major and minor. That was mind-blowing, and I think that would be really cool to share that with the public.
I agree. That's a great data point.
It is public.
It is public, but I don't know how often we update. But I think he's talking about getting it, out more.
Yeah, either in an info-only memo to you folks on a quarterly basis, or we could play around with other mechanisms to get that data both to you and to the public. Okay.
Anything else, John?
I would just add that in service of our customer service-facing goal, surveys on how people feel like we're doing as a city on that side of it.
Yeah, at the beginning of COVID, actually, and I think the year before COVID, we had coming out of Salesforce, kind of a survey that went out sort of on that letter of completion or at some milestone within the permit review process. And we were getting some qualitative data out of that, not a ton. Initially, I think we got some good responses, and then, kind of our regular folks that submit applications, we kind of, there was definitely a downward trend in the number of comments that we were receiving. Kind of, I don't know if it was survey fatigue or what, but I don't know if you have any other comments about that, but we stopped. We've definitely talked about re-implementing that in some way. We've kind of gone back and forth of what the best mechanism is and to who and on kind of at what point, but it's certainly something that we'd be open to and willing to.
And let me think, I love that question. Rather than through Salesforce or something, would it make sense to plan a survey, say 6 months from now, in July, to say, both informative, this is the work we've been doing, these are some of the changes we've made. Would you, mail us back the survey with additional items and suggestions or something like that? Kind of make it a little more formal than an email that comes in with 50 emails, make it something, return, your input will help us improve this department and try to survey people on the results. Would that make a little sense too?
Yeah, I think both a small version of that, when you buy anything online, you get 3 questions. It's like, how did you feel about your experience today? Even something as simple as 1 to 5 stars. And it might not seem like a lot, but cumulatively over time, that tells a story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and for me, to answer your question, I believe the data points that you brought tonight were wonderful. I think the ones that Bill brought up, especially the ones that you agree with, working with two sides of the coin there, are very helpful. And then just to talk about ComDev in general, that the concerns are pace and scale, empty spaces, installed projects, and I reiterate the points I made earlier tonight about how to just make it less painful for everyone, but especially longtime locals who get caught up in the layer cake that is community development, and as they try to stay here and live here, the cost to improve their homes is just untenable, and it ends up hollowing out our community. So just trying to make things as efficient for everyone, because even some of these larger scale projects add to the unaffordability that is Aspen at times.
We will be shortly in Q1. I think it's one of the first things we have on tap for Q1 is a response to, a potential code response to the question on fee waiver, fee deferral that came out of the one particular permit that came in front of council probably a couple months ago now. So that'll be one of the first things you folks see from us in 26.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. For me, again, I agree with everything that's been said about the data points and anything else you think about. And, you know, maybe I'm veering into your first question, but for me, a lot of the next steps are obviously what you're doing internally and with your department, and ask for our support as needed for any of those proposals. But I do think a lot about our capacity separate from the review and the planning and zoning for really looking at potential code changes in next year. And that's an important element of your work. The one thing I think we've all heard a lot about, and I'm not sure what can be done or not done, but are the kind of abandoned buildings and derelict-looking buildings. The Buckhorn Lodge is a horrible entrance to our town, you know, when people come by. And I don't know what we can do or not do. You know, people talk about a vacancy tax. People talk about, you know, all sorts of different options. But it seems to me that our community really is very tired of having half-built projects that get delayed for whatever reason. And, you know, I've thought about, you know, I know there are the state laws, investing and everything like that, but, you know, you know, the difference between a demo permit gives you another year, and then you get your excavation permit another year, are the timelines that we can tighten up within our code separate from state law? And are there incentives or disincentives that we can create for people leaving properties, especially in the core, looking like that? So, you know, I just know there's going to be additional work that we're asking for out of ComDev, additional to what your standard operating things are. You know, how we deal better with development challenges, and you reference it in your memo. I think we all kind of have it in the back of our minds and then push it off because it's such a big undertaking. But the truth is, it is time to begin an update of the Aspen Area Community Plan. And I think a great many of our values will be reaffirmed in that, but I think it's time for some clarification. And it may well be that some topics, which are growth related and traffic volume and congestion related, can only be answered through an Aspen Area Community Plan update. Should we still be advertising, hey, 20 new beds a year, open up, try to think of where you could develop them, X amount new retail space every year? Yeah, you know, we don't always allocate this, we don't roll it over, it doesn't add up. But still, we're sending a welcome invitation card to a development community that I don't know that the community as a whole really wants that much more new development of more beds or more this or more anything until we've actually had a chance to get a better grip on the traffic and congestion and infrastructure sufficiency to really support endless growth. But I have been told that, you know, just reducing those GMQS allotments or desires for future growth really should come through a signal from a new Aspen Area Community Plan as opposed to just a council table discussion. But, you know, we're never going to solve the volume of traffic and cars and construction vehicles and service vehicles if the town continues to believe it can grow as if it's 1999 and we're still in competition with, every other ski resort and cruise line in the country, instead of just trying to be Aspen and stay Aspen and keep those values. So I see that as big work, whether it's coming up in 2026 or it's something that this department gears up for in 2027. So that's where I really want to know what we can do and think about ways we might be able to discourage future change orders. Or if a change order is something that's not just, we decided to change the finishes some here, but we've decided we want to add 3 new bedrooms and get rid of the affordable housing unit, move it over here. There needs to be penalties for that, or just thank you very much, you're going to the back of the queue now, and we're not busting out a special time for you in front of everybody else. You got approvals for one thing, and we're just trying to break ground and then change your plans. We have to come up with a stop program for that.
Should council at some point ask community development to pursue an update to the AACP, we would not be surprised by that request.
Okay, well, I think starting to get some broader numbers and discussion of process would be important, but it's not imminent. It is a joint project with the county, and we'd want to see their participation and support in that as well. It's an Aspen area community plan. And I think it's an important opportunity to bring in what have become the really traffic impacts of the urban area of the county surrounding Aspen. And that's an important component for both ComDevs to look at in the future.
Okay. And then lastly, and this may be a simple question, or maybe a more complicated question, but I do think that staff, we feel like we're, on the right path of making what we acknowledge are incremental improvements to this kind of long-standing process. But just wanted to check in with council to make sure that that was the right track for us, or if, going back a couple slides, there was interest, because I really do think making significant changes to permits that are, taking a year to put out on these major permits, it's going to require these things if we're going to make market changes to those timelines on the big projects. I think staff is willing to go down this path, but it's pursuing any one of these 3 things, and certainly all 3 of them, would be a fairly significant departure for staff in terms of the way that we're kind of approaching our work, both short-term and long-term. So just kind of wanted to make sure, as we're kind of moving forward, that, kind of our approach is aligned with council's interest on this topic.
I'll say for myself that I am supportive of this approach, but if you go back to that other slide, the bullet number 3 was, is there a way that you can have a single reviewer following one project all the way through? I don't know if that's as major a department change or if that's a staffing issue, but to the extent we can do that with some of the major projects makes some sense to me.
Yeah, I would say basically the same thing, except I would add 1 and 2 there as far as can you incrementally enhance those as well. Like I talked about earlier with the regulatory approach, if there's one HPC or historic code that you want to tackle one at a time, I'm all for it as well within your bounds.
Historic preservation and tents are on my list.
Okay. Yeah. Well, see, there you go. Thank you.
Very good. Others?
Agreed. I wouldn't support sweeping changes here tonight and incremental, but I do have the question, and I don't know if you can answer it, is that I understand why the regulations are there and how we got here. From a staff perspective, has it gotten too complex? Is it still serving the need and the problems that we set out to solve with some of these regulations?
The only thing I could say is it's an anecdote. When we were working with Baseline on the planning side of things, they were looking at our, kind of our dimensional standards, how we deal with setbacks and how we calculate floor area, how we calculate height. And Sophie Varga, our zoning administrator, showed them a diagram of a permit that was in her queue of this house and the complexity of this house from subgrade to roof. And it had subgrade sort of calculations on it. It takes one of our zoning administrator or one of our zoning officers looking at that house probably a week, literally on a house that's that complicated, probably a week, to make sure that those homes are compliant with our zoning regulations about dimensional standards. Maybe not a week full-time, but they're working on it for a week with their other responsibilities. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. So yes, we have made it too complicated. Part of it is that we've exempted a lot of things and given, those kinds of things over time, and those exemptions are complicated. We give exemptions for deck area, we give exemptions for height, we give exemptions for, and so that's part of the process. But I will just say we have made a very complex situation for ourselves that it's probably not unprecedented across the country, but I bet we're in the 90th percentile, at least.
Okay, thanks. Something to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because we're probably also in the 90th percentile for value that people perceive in the community and why they want to buy in, oddly enough.
That might be a higher percentile.
Yes, I am supportive of staff efforts and making incremental but important improvements to permit and land use review.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Appreciate your time this evening.
We appreciate the time you put into preparing this report and getting ready to speak with us. And just let us know as we go on what else we can do to support your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's it. Pete, you don't have anything new for us? We meet tomorrow at 5 o'clock? Yeah. The consent agenda did not end up as heavy as I had thought it was going to be at the beginning, but if you do have questions on anything specific that Pete can answer for us in the meeting, just go ahead and get him an email. And we'll get the information. Thanks again. And thank you, Grassroots. I think that's the end of our meeting.
Hey, I saw some great news besides that housing thing in Steamboat,
Yeah, that was pretty good.
wasn't it? Park City was